Linkin Park's celebrated debut album 2000's Hybrid Theory would come out during the peak of nu metal's popularity. Linkin Park over the next several years would become inescapable if you listened to either rock radio or watched MTV. But what came next was truly amazing. Linkin Park did something that so few bands could do in their careers. Their popularity would eclipse musical trends in the industry, and they soon ventured into uncharted territory, much to the chagrin of some of their fans. But sadly, their nearly two-decade run came to an abrupt end following the death of frontman Chester Bennington. Today, let's take a deep dive into the career of Linkin Park. Linkin Park's career begins with rapper, vocalist, guitarist, keyboardist, and producer Mike Shinoda, who would be born to a Japanese father and a white mother, with the musician recalling to Howard Stern that being mixed race resulted in him not really knowing where he belonged in school. His mother would encourage him at the age of 6 to take up piano lessons, thinking it would look good on his college applications. In addition to music lessons, Shinoda would tell the shock jock that he spent a lot of his time as a young child painting and doing artwork, with the idea that perhaps someday he'd become an artist. It was by the time he became a teenager that he soon started getting into the blues, jazz, and hip-hop. Shinoda by the mid-80s would be hugely influenced by Run DMC's second record, King of Rock, and Beastie Boys' album Licensed to Ill, as well as LL Cool J's Bad. In addition to that, he'd also get into Public Enemy and NWA. It would be the collaborations and the blending of rock and rap that gave Shinoda an idea of what he wanted to pursue musically, telling Rolling Stone at the time, "The first show I went to was Anthrax and Public Enemy. They did Bring the Noise together, and I was like, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard." Wanting to follow in the footsteps of his musical idols who sampled popular rock music in their songs, he would ask his musical teacher to teach him how to do just that. He would recall to Rolling Stone, "When I was about 13, I told my teacher Eileen I wanted to get more into playing jazz and blues and maybe hip-hop. She said she couldn't help me out because that wasn't her training. She said, maybe you just want to get a keyboard and start learning those things on your own." I thought that was really big of her to say, and definitely led to an important point in my life where I bought a keyboard. Then I got a sampler, started making beats, and playing around with MIDI and digital-based music. Shinoda would tell Howard Stern that prior to Chester fronting Linkin Park, the seeds of the group really began with himself and a childhood friend of his named Mark Wakefield, who he first started making music with, recalling to the shock jock, "The band was just originally me and Mark, and I would mostly do all the rap stuff, and he would do most of the rock stuff, and then we'd teach each other the other side." Mark, for his part, happened to be living next door to guitarist Brad Delson, with Shinoda adding, almost like a TV sitcom, they were next door neighbors, and their windows were across from each other. We'd be in Mark's room playing Sega Genesis, and you'd hear Brad playing Metallica on the guitar from the other window. Delson was also a schoolmate of Shinoda at Agora High School in Southern California. The trio soon recruited a bandmate of Delson, drummer Rob Borden, who played with him in the band Relative Degree. Borden, for his part, got his start in drumming in the 3rd grade after his parents took him to an Aerosmith concert. Fun fact you guys may not know is that Borden's mother, Patty, was actually the high school girlfriend of Aerosmith drummer Joey Kramer, who he credited with coming up with the band's name. It was following high school that Shinoda attended Pasadena's California Art of College Design, where he studied illustration. Shinoda would refer to the school as, and I quote, "the Harvard of art school" during his interview with Howard Stern. He would admit to Stern that his submission package to get into the program heavily consisted of figure drawings as well as musical drawings, and something that closely resembled Dungeons & Dragons. It was at art school that Shinoda met an aspiring illustrator and DJ named Joseph Hahn, who shared his love of hip-hop. Hahn soon joined the group, and while Borden attended UCLA during this time, he soon met and roomed with a bassist named Dave Farrell, with both of them graduating in 1999. Naming themselves Zero, spelled with an X, the first incarnation of Linkin Park was now born. Shinoda soon turned his bedroom into a makeshift studio with a 4-track recorder and a vocal mic to make the band's early demos. Mike, by his own admission, experimented with different sounds without really knowing where he would end up, revealing to Rolling Stone, "I didn't know anything about old school rock and roll or blues, but I'd hear a B.B. King song and just think it was the greatest thing ever. I always ended up taking those influences and making hip-hop beats out of them. So I put my bluesy piano to a sampled beat, and eventually I started rapping over it." The members of Zero would spend their nights playing music, with Shinoda describing how chaotic his life was at the time. When he was a student, recalling to Rolling Stone, "I do classes from 9 to 4, 4 to 7, and 7 to 10 at night. I'd go from there to band practice in Hollywood for 2 to 3 hours, then all the way back to my parents' house and work on paintings until I couldn't do it anymore. Then I'd get up in the morning and do it all over again." In 1997, Zero would put together and locally release a 4-track cassette sampler, and while Delson was in college during this time, he also interned at Zomba Music Publishing, which represented artists at the time including Korn and Limp Bizkit, whose accolades were scattered throughout their office. Delson soon told his boss, a guy named Jeff Blue, the head of artist relations at the company, about his band Zero. Blue would end up going to Zero's show at LA's Whiskey A Go-Go venue, which saw them open for System of a Down. Impressed by the performance, Zero soon got a publishing deal with Zomba Music. It was over the next year the band played countless showcases for numerous major and indie labels, all of which passed on Zero. Perhaps it was the subject matter the band was singing about that resulted in them getting turned down numerous times, with Shinoda recalling to Rolling Stone, "For the most part, we made a lot of joke songs. Gangsta rap had just poked its head out, and we made a lot of joke gangsta rap songs. They were all about smoking weed and being pimps, and those were two things we were totally unfamiliar with. Like a lot of suburban kids, there was an element of voyeurism there. I had never been down to Long Beach, you know." It was following a disastrous showcase in 1998 in Los Angeles that Mark was fired from the band. Mark would end up becoming the vice president of Velvet Hammer, which is an artist management company with a pretty impressive roster of artists, including Korn, Alice in Chains, Deftones, and the Smashing Pumpkins. On Linkin Park's debut album Hybrid Theory, Mark would get writing credits on several songs. He would also be credited with designing the front cover of System of a Down's album Toxicity. The band was now left without a frontman, with Shinoda recalling to Kerrang, "I wanted somebody in the band who had the same drive and passion for melodic singing vocals as I had towards rapping vocals." What followed was a 4 to 5 month search auditioning singers, and it would be Jeff Blue who suggested a singer from Arizona named Chester Bennington, who he'd heard about from a lawyer friend at a recent music conference. Bennington was about 2 years older than most of the members of Linkin Park. Chester's musical inspirations would range from Stone Temple Pilots to the Smiths to Depeche Mode. He had long given up his rock and roll dream by the late 90s. In fact, a year before he received the call to audition for Zero, Chester told his then wife he was quitting music altogether. His first wife Samantha would recall to Rolling Stone, "He was screaming and yelling, 'I'm not doing music anymore.' I looked at him and said, 'I'm not letting you quit. You owe me an hour of practice whether you're singing to the radio or playing your guitar.' I also told him, 'One day you're going to get a call from LA. I just know it. You need to be ready.'" It was during the earlier part of the decade that Chester had played in an alternative outfit named Grey Days, who had put out an album, got some local radio play, and nearly nabbed a recording contract. In addition to opening for the likes of Bush and Suicidal Tendencies, and even at one point they started headlining their own shows at venues that seated a few thousand people. But their popularity didn't extend much outside Arizona, and not helping was that Chester's bandmates didn't have the same drive and focus as he did. With him recalling to Kerrang! Magazine, nobody outside Arizona was interested. It was very difficult to be the guy who wrote and sang the songs and share credit with people who didn't really give a shit. Very few people will respect the opinion of a 16-year-old songwriter fronting a band. I was pretty frustrated. By 1998, Grey Days was done. By 1999, Chester seemed to have settled into his new life. He was married, he secured a stable tech job, and was about to turn 23. It was in the middle of a surprise birthday party for Chester that he received a call from Jeff Blue saying, and I quote, "I'm going to give you your big break. I have a great band for you." The band was called Zero and they needed a singer. It was following that conversation the next day, Chester would receive a demo that featured 2 tracks. One featured the vocals of the band's previous vocalist, and the other was an instrumental track with the vocals removed. Chester would tell Kerrang! Magazine, "I noticed that Mike's rapping was really good and I felt I could improve on the melodies as far as the choruses were concerned. Something told me that this was the golden ticket to get inside Willy Wonka's chocolate factory." It was a few days later Chester soon added the vocals to the demo and sent it back to Zomba Music. Jeff Blue would recall hearing Chester's audition tape saying, "What I heard floored me. Every crack of his voice had a short story to tell. It was genuine, vulnerable, urgent, beautiful, and it hit you in the gut." Several days later, Chester soon flew out to Zero's rehearsal space in Los Angeles. Chester's whole future depended on this audition. He quit his job back home, he got the blessing of his wife, and brought along a handful of clothes and his favorite microphone. Despite thinking he already had the audition and that the red carpet would be rolled out for him, he soon learned he wasn't the only one auditioning with the band. Not helping was that he had become reserved to working in an office environment and showed up to the audition wearing a silk bowling shirt, something Blue told him to change out of. Appearance-wise, Chester was anything but a rock star, with him telling Rolling Stone, "There was a lot of fear, we had a lot to lose, our credit to destroy, a relationship to destroy." But once he opened his mouth and started singing, it was game over, and one other person who was auditioning for the vocalist job simply left after hearing him sing. Mike Shinoda would recall to Kerrang, Chester was very hot and cold back then, referring to his ability to go from a quiet whisper to an all-out scream, adding, "I mean, it would be impossible to be in a situation with Chester and not be in awe of his raw talent." But that raw talent also came with a lot of darkness. Born to a nurse mother and a police detective father, Chester Bennington grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and was the youngest of 4 children. It was by the age of 11 his parents divorced, and feeling abandoned by his mother, he soon went to live with his father, who worked long hours investigating crimes against children. Chester would recall that his father, because of his work, wasn't in the best frame of mind at the time. It was over the next 2 years he would face abuse at the hands of an older male friend, telling Rolling Stone, "I was being beaten up and being forced to do things I didn't want to do. It destroyed my self-confidence." In addition to channeling his emotions into music, Chester, wanting to deal with the trauma he experienced, also turned to hard drugs and alcohol at a young age, telling Rolling Stone, "I was a lot more confident when I was high. I felt like I had more control over my environment when I was on hallucinogens or drinking." Chester would tell Rolling Stone that he did end his relationship with drugs for the first time prior to meeting his wife Samantha, after he came face to face with a local gang who barged into a place where he was getting high, and it resulted with him and his friends being assaulted and robbed. That year was 1992. It was shortly after Chester joined the band Zero. They temporarily changed their name to Hybrid Theory before learning that another band already had dibs on the name, with Mike telling Kerrang, "I'm kind of glad we didn't call ourselves by that name. Hybrid music is such a trend right now, it's almost a joke to say that your band is about mixing styles since everybody is doing it." The band went through a few more name ideas before Chester suggested the name Linkin Park, which was named after the park space in Santa Monica. As the members would soon learn, though, there's a lot of other places in the US that had their own Linkin Parks. Another reason for choosing the name was that the website domain was up for grabs. Despite nailing the audition and going all in with Linkin Park, Chester would admit to the LA Times that he still had some reservations, recalling, "I was just thinking about how great my life in Phoenix was in comparison to what I was doing out here. Even though I didn't have a lot of money, at least I had a job and a decent place to live. I didn't have all my stuff in my car." Adding in a separate interview to Louder Sound, "I had basically decided to retire from music. I got a job in real estate and thought that while I would probably still make tunes for fun, I would need to find something else to do full time." Chester's first few months in Linkin Park were pretty rough. He was pretty much homeless, so he would float between friends' and relatives' couches, in addition to sleeping in his car. Even during the Hybrid Theory sessions, Chester would sleep in his car if the studio was closed, and when the studio opened, he'd sleep on the couch until the rest of the band members showed up. With Linkin Park's lineup now solidified and the internet becoming a more popular way for unsigned acts to promote their music, the band soon hit the music message boards and chat rooms, and they soon started to see their fan base growing. It resulted in the group enlisting their fans as a sort of street team to promote their music to the masses. It was also during this time the band released a 6-song EP titled Hybrid Theory, which was given out to their street teams. What followed was a 9-song demo that was sent out to record labels, with dozens of them once again passing on the band. One count that I saw was that upwards of 45 labels said no to signing Linkin Park. Chester would tell Louder Sound about the band's inability to nab a recording contract. "I think we confused people. Nobody really knew what to do with us. They were thinking, how do we promote this? Where does this go at radio?" I could see how they thought it was just too much work. It was a pain in the ass, but it gave us time to figure out who we were as a band, and gave Mike and I the time to get comfortable with one another. Seeming like polar opposites, the core of Linkin Park has always been Mike and Chester's songwriting talents and their relationship. Chester would discuss his childhood problems with Mike, who sometimes used those stories as inspiration for the band's lyrics. Despite Mike and Chester being the face of the band, Spin magazine would write in their 2003 cover story on the group's songwriting process, "Linkin Park never jam. There's something to be said for doing it that way," Phoenix says. But for us, it's just counterproductive. Instead, they come up with their ideas alone or in pair, and the collaboration begins in the studio, where ideas are tweaked, focus grouped until everyone's satisfied. The band, in a last-ditch effort, would reach out to their longtime champion of the band, Jeff Blue, who would now move to Warner Brothers Music. His first band he would sign at his new job would be Linkin Park in 1999. Keep in mind now that Warner Brothers already passed on Linkin Park 3 times up until this point. The band, however, was far from living large even after signing with Warner Brothers. There was plenty of tough times ahead during the making of their first album, Hybrid Theory. Chester would tell the LA Times, "I had to work at coffee shops part-time just to have money to go eat at Sandy's Burgers across the street from where we practiced. I went insane. Sometimes at midnight, I'd be knocking at Mike's door. I can't do this. I can't do this. I gotta go. It's just insane. What was I thinking? My option in life was to do this or just work a 9-to-5 job. That was it. But I was like, all right, I'm going to go back there. I will make it, and I might as well do it with these guys, and we'll figure out how to make it work." The band soon butted heads with their label over both musical direction and the band members. Early on, execs at Warner Brothers even tried to get Mike Shinoda ousted from the group, trying a divide and conquer technique, with the label telling Chester that he should be the face of the band. The label at one point even tried to bring in a rapper from New York City to replace Shinoda, but it's fair to say that Chester didn't react very well to the label's suggestion, being fiercely loyal to his bandmates. He would tell Warner Brothers that they could basically go to hell. The band soon ran into another problem. They were short-handed in the studio, with bassist Dave Farrell playing on the road with his other outfit, Tasty Snacks. So Brad Delson took up bass duties in addition to playing guitar. Adding to the problems was that the band and the label initially struggled to find a producer for the record, as a lot of producers didn't want to work with newer bands. But thankfully, they would end up enlisting Eve 6 and Lit producer Don Gilmore. Also assigned to the project would be renowned engineer Andy Wallace, who had experience mixing rap and rock, having worked on the Aerosmith Run DMC collaboration Walk This Way. Using a lot of the songs in their demos that were previously rejected by record labels, the band fine-tuned certain songs, rewrote parts over a 7-month period. But the band and Gilmore had some friction between them. Commandeering the famous NRG studios in Los Angeles, they would sometimes clash over choruses or hooks not being good enough, with Chester recalling working on one song telling Louder Sound, "I just wanted to punch that dude in the face. I was so pissed. Nothing I did was good enough for him. I thought, man, everything you say to me takes me one step closer to the edge, and I'm about to break. And then I thought, wait, that might actually work." Other times, the band would spend hours rewriting lyrics, with Chester admitting to Louder Sound, "We would rewrite lyrics like 75 times. It was crazy, but because we didn't take the shortcuts, it ended up meaning more. We believed in what we were doing so much." Unlike a lot of bands who nabbed major recording contracts, Linkin Park still had a very punk rock DIY attitude even after they signed to a major label. Han and Shinoda would create the artwork for Hybrid Theory, while Borden and Delson dealt with the financial and marketing side of the band. Chester, meanwhile, designed the band's merchandise, and Farrell wrote the band's tour diary for the group's website. The band played a whopping 324 shows in 2001, almost a show a day. A lot of the press coverage of the band in the early days painted the group as being straight edge with a hard work ethic. My favorite quote would come from Spin magazine, who wrote in their 2003 cover issue about the band, "In a genre known for its gratuitous nastiness, Linkin Park are an exception. They're the band you'd trust to escort your sister to a movie, except they'd probably stand her up to log some extra studio time." The band would employ a strict no party, no alcohol, smoking, or drug policy on their tour buses and dressing rooms. Mike, for his part, detested the whole rock and roll cliche, telling Rolling Stone, "Even when I was in high school, parties were like everything is just so played out. You go, people are drinking, people hook up, you talk to the same people who say the same stupid crap. It's boring, and rather than do that, I could go hang out with my friends and write a new song." To show you how straight edge the band was, Chester would recall in one interview that the band would get thanked by countless janitors and clubs for not trashing the place, allowing the janitors to leave work early. However, during the early days of the Hybrid Theory tour, there was some strain between Chester and the rest of his bandmates. Papa Roach would sometimes take Chester partying, much to the chagrin of his bandmates, resulting in him drinking a lot, with Chester telling Rolling Stone, "I found myself not saying no to other things that would have made me another rock and roll cliche." It would result in Chester traveling separately from the rest of the band, but he would soon turn things around. Also noted by the press coverage of the band was that their debut record didn't contain any profanity. The group's first album, despite being filled with heavy guitars and rage-filled lyrics, contained no swear words. Chester would tell Rolling Stone, "When Mike and I sat down and wrote the lyrics, we wanted to be as honest and as open as we could. We wanted something people could connect with, not just vulgarity and violence. We didn't want to make a big point of not cussing, but we don't have to hide behind anything to show how tough we can be." While the band was always vague about the exact meaning of its lyrics, Hybrid Theory's overarching themes dealt with mental health issues like anxiety, depression, paranoia, and abuse. The band was, however, a little more forthcoming on the single Crawling, which dealt with Chester's substance abuse issues. Released on October 24, 2000, Hybrid Theory would combine elements of pop, hip-hop, metal, and electronica. Unknown to the band at the time was that the album would become a genre-defining record for the decade. But there were also warning signs of just how big the album was going to be. Ahead of the album coming out, Warner Brothers previewed the lead single One Step Closer at a radio convention, and radio programmers were floored. The song showcased the vocal mix of Chester and Mike that the band soon became synonymous for. Released 2 months before Hybrid Theory came out, the single peaked at number 4 on the mainstream rock charts, while the video soon became a mainstay on MTV. Crawling would be issued as the second single in March of 2001 and would peak at number 3 on the mainstream rock charts. The song would prove to be one of the most difficult songs to sing live for Chester, as he would admit to Spin Magazine. The album's fourth single, In the End, would come a full year after Hybrid Theory came out, but it proved to be the band's biggest single from the album. The track, with its recognizable piano intro, spent a whopping 39 weeks on the charts, peaking at number 2 on the Hot 100 charts. Initially, Chester was not a fan of the track, telling V Club, "I was never a fan of In the End, and I didn't even want it on the record. Honestly, how wrong could I have possibly been? I basically decided at that point, I don't know what the I'm talking about." The album debuted on the Billboard charts at number 16, moving about 50,000 copies in its first week. Chester would make a bet with a friend that the album would likely go gold, which is about 500,000 copies, by Christmas. In reality, the album went gold in less than a month. Even a year and a half after its release, the record still continued to sell about 100,000 copies a week in the band's native US. It would go on to sell a whopping 32 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of the year 2000 and one of the best-selling records of the decade. Chester would talk about why kids related to the band's music, saying, "I think it's a lot more common than people think. If you look at it, there's almost 2 different types of kids these days in this country. There's kids who are really together, and then there's like train wrecks. I think people don't get told enough that they have the power to make themselves feel better. I think we do that with our music. As dark as it is, I think it's very positive and motivating." Despite the band's millions of fans, they also had their detractors and soon became a pretty polarizing group. Metal purists merely wrote them off as being a boy band with guitars, but it did little to faze its members. Some of the criticism even came from their tour mates Deftones, with this member slagging off Linkin Park in the early 2000s. In addition to that, the band also got some flack for being more of a business than an actual band, with Mike answering back to critics saying, "We get a reputation for being a business rather than a band, but that was because we were so focused on getting our stuff done." As the band turned their attention to what would come next, Chester would indicate to Rolling Stone that perhaps the success of the group's first album would haunt the band for the rest of their careers. Recalling in 2002, "We have the number 1 record of the year, we're nominated for all these Grammys. Why did it have to be the first record? Now every record we make is going to be compared to this." Between their first album and the group's full-length follow-up, the band would take a blade to Hybrid Theory, releasing the 2002 remix record Reanimation, which proved to be another success, becoming the 4th largest selling remix album of all time. Linkin Park began working on ideas for their second LP, Meteora, during Ozfest in 2001. The album's name would be inspired from a beautiful landscape in Greece. As for the album's iconic artwork, the person on the cover was not a member of the band, but rather an artist named Boris Telegan. He was helping the band on their original artwork, which was supposed to be a giant mural painting, but instead was replaced by a shot of Delta working on the artwork. Mike would explain in the short documentary about the album's artwork, saying, "We chose the image of Boris for the cover of the album because of the quiet power of it. It was between their downtime of playing Halo multiplayer on the road that they would come up with song ideas in a studio they had on their tour bus. In fact, Linkin Park would travel with 2 tour buses, one which was outfitted with a studio so they could record ideas on the road, while the other was where they lived and slept in. Some ideas would be half-finished songs, melodies, samples, loops, or just a riff. One of those early songs would be the track Somewhere I Belong, whose intro Chester had come up with after playing acoustic guitar. But after some discussion between the band members who loved what Chester had come up with, they felt the acoustic guitar felt a little too folky. Instead, Shinoda and Han added effects to it and reversed it, with Mike explaining on the Making of Meteora documentary, since I reversed it, it was playing 4-3-2-1, the chord progression was reversed. Then I cut it into 4 pieces and I played it 1-2-3-4, and that's why it has that sweeping sound. The lyrics for the song, however, proved to be a little problematic, with Mike telling Spin Magazine, "We tried 40 choruses. It was just agonizing. You can't even imagine writing 10. And we were writing the 10th one, and in our minds, it was done. And people would come in and say, yeah, it's cool, and that's not supposed to be the response you want. You want, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard. In our heads, we were thinking, damn it, we gotta go on writing." Other songs like Faint were born in a similar way. The inspiration came from guitarist Brad Delson, who was playing the riff to a metronome at about 70 beats per minute. Mike would take the riff, speed it up, and after the band discussed the changes, Mike's alterations stayed in place. The band once again commandeered NRG Studios and brought back producer Don Gilmore. Gilmore would tell Billboard magazine they were rock stars at that point. How are they going to follow that up? Meteor's lyrics would tackle isolation, love, loss, and death, with Mike telling Howard Stern that due to the success of Hybrid Theory, the band had basically carte blanche to do whatever they wanted on their second record without much interference from their record label. And it soon became a balancing act of giving fans who loved their first record more of what they wanted, but at the same time surprising them. Being more of a natural evolution than a complete departure, Meteora was a tighter and more experienced band. Once the tour for Hybrid Theory was over, Linkin Park headed into the studio and started pre-production to ensure the music was as solid as possible. By August of 2002, the band had written upwards of 80 songs, which had to be narrowed down to 13. Don Gilmore would tell Louder Sound, there was a trust element that was there on Meteora that maybe wasn't quite there before. If I asked them to do stuff that was outside of their comfort zone, they were fine with going there and trying to find those special moments. Released in March of 2003, the nu metal scene appeared to be on its way out. Limp Bizkit recorded Results May Vary, which was a commercial disappointment, while at the same time Korn's album Take a Look in the Mirror saw the band unable to match its album sales from a few years prior. Chester would tell Kerrang in 2003 about the changing musical landscape, saying, "I hate to say it because I love both of those bands musically and as people, but there is an up and down cycle in everyone's life and career. If our fans don't like our album, I think we should take it as a sign they don't like our second album. I think we should take it as a sign that we've lost touch with our fans, and we need to regain that trust. This band works better under pressure. We're not going to worry about outselling Hybrid Theory because you cannot count on those things. You just have to go in and write songs you like and do things that make you happy. If you can do that, then you've succeeded." Meteora's first single, Somewhere I Belong, was intentionally released as the lead single from the record to satisfy fans by giving them a familiar sound. It was also Linkin Park's label that chose the first couple singles from Meteora, but the band was pretty adamant that at some point they wanted to have the song Breaking the Habit released as a single. Breaking the Habit had a long history, with Mike Shinoda having spent nearly 5 years working on the track, long before he met Chester Bennington. Despite the song's subject matter, it was not written by Chester, instead being written by Mike. Standing in sharp contrast to anything in the band's catalog up until this point, the song contained no screaming and more program beats, and was more indicative of the type of music the band would create later on in their career. It would be the band's more experimental and newer sounds, including the instrumental track Session, that got them nominated for a Grammy, giving the band a sense of vindication or assurances that they were headed in the right direction. The album would also contain a rap song called No One's Listening that sampled a traditional Japanese flute. Meteor's closing number, Numb, would go on to become the biggest single off the record, peaking at number 11 on the Hot 100 charts. The song would be written a month before the band hit NRG Studios in the summer of 2002, and it was originally built around the intro hook and came together pretty quickly. Mike would recall, "It's kind of about those times when you've got no feeling left or you just don't care. It's almost like exhaustion or something, which, funny enough, is how we felt after touring Hybrid Theory last year. It was during the last month and a half of working on Meteora that Chester would fall ill and had to wait to record some of his vocal parts while the rest of the album was being mixed. Meteora would produce 4 huge singles with Somewhere I Belong, Faint, Breaking the Habit, and Numb. But despite all the commercial success, the band only got a Grammy nomination for the instrumental track Session. It was something that upset Chester, as he told Launch Radio Networks, "I personally feel that this record is better than Hybrid Theory. I think there are certain songs that definitely exceed the quality of Even Crawling. And to not even be nominated for a track that was an album track, I mean it was an instrumental, like an interlude. Personally, I'm kind of insulted. I'd rather be not nominated for anything than to be nominated for a track that's not even a band track." Critical reception to Meteora was mixed, with some claiming that the band played it too safe, but despite that, the band's sophomore record sold over 7 million copies in the States and over 16 million copies worldwide. Linkin Park would return the following year with a collaboration with rapper Jay-Z that was spearheaded by MTV. The network had asked the rapper who he'd like to work with as part of a rap-rock collaboration, and he instantly chose Linkin Park. It was in early 2004 that Linkin Park was on the road promoting Meteora that word of the collaboration got back to the band. It was several days on the tour bus that Mike would compile song ideas of what a collaboration could sound like. Those rough sketches were then sent to Jay-Z, who took a liking to what he heard, and the two parties soon hit the studio in the later part of the year. Released in November of 2004, their EP titled Collision Course would become the first EP since Alice in Chains' 1994 release Jar of Flies to top the Billboard album charts. The album would prove to be a commercial success, moving over 2 million copies, despite mixed reviews from critics. It was following the band's collaboration with Jay-Z that the members soon took a break from Linkin Park, with Chester playing in the outfit Dead by Sunrise, while Mike started the group Fort Minor. But the band also underwent some turmoil in their personal lives, with Chester divorcing his first wife Samantha in 2005. He would recall to Rolling Stone, "I drank myself to the point where I couldn't leave the house, and I couldn't function." It was following his divorce Chester soon checked into rehab, and 4 years would pass until Linkin Park would release their long-awaited third LP. Rumors were also running rampant up until this point that the band had possibly broken up after the album was delayed several times. Linkin Park would return in 2007 with their third record, Minutes to Midnight, which saw them go in a more pop and experimental direction. They would also change up producers, bringing in Rick Rubin, and they would also co-produce the album. The band wanted to shed their so-called nu metal or rap rock sound that the press had bestowed upon them. Chester would tell Kerrang in 2007, "Calling us nu metal is to me like saying you suck," with Mike adding, "People wanting to label us rap rock, we thought fine, you're pissing us off, we're going to make something so different, you can shove nu metal up your ass." The album proved to be an enormous undertaking, with the group spending more than a year in the studio, and Rick Rubin giving the band a lot of tough love. Mike would tell Kerrang, "It's frustrating to have someone dismiss something in 30 seconds that you've been working on for days. Having your lyrics rejected is like being punched in the face." Minutes to Midnight, while more ambitious in scope, was also more political in its lyrics. The lead single, What I've Done, would take aim at humanity's impact to the planet, while also finding a silver lining. The track Little Things Give You Away is a seething indictment of the Bush administration's disastrous response to Hurricane Katrina, and the lead single What I've Done would drop in April of 2007, and it ushered in a new era for the band. The album would have some heavier tracks with No More Sorrow, Bleed It Out, and Given Up, while the record also contained more softer and poppier sounding stuff with Leave Out All the Rest and Shadow of the Day. Despite the change in sound, all of the album's 5 singles would chart on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and moved 5 million copies worldwide. 2007 was also the year that Transformers featured the band's song What I've Done on their film soundtrack, and in 2009 the band recorded arguably one of their best known songs, New Divide, for Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. The song was a massive success, peaking at number 6 on the Hot 100 charts, and the band would have several more of their songs in their later part of their career featured on the franchise's soundtrack. Minutes to Midnight gave fans a glimpse of what was to come in Linkin Park's follow-up release, 2010's 1,000 Suns, which was really a concept album dealing with the fear of nuclear war. Something that seems remarkably timely given everything we're seeing in the world today. The title for the record would be taken from nuclear scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who in 1945 described the atomic bomb as being, and I quote, "as bright as 1,000 suns," a line that was used in the lead single The Catalyst. Linkin Park bassist Dave Phoenix Farrell would warn fans ahead of the album's release, and I quote, "We've known the album was going to be different, and if fans were expecting Hybrid Theory or Meteora, they're going to be surprised. It's going to take people some time to figure it out and know what to do with it." To kick off the new decade, Linkin Park's fourth record, unlike their first three albums, didn't seem to be reminiscent or an improved version of what was popular on the charts at the time. 1,000 Suns really just stood on its own, and it also proved to be Linkin Park's most polarizing album to date. The band also did a promotional tie-in for the lead single The Catalyst with Electronic Arts' new game Medal of Honor, which was also rebooting their longtime franchise. The band would also have several songs from the album featured in Guitar Hero, and Waiting for the End appeared in Rock Band as DLC. By the way, did anyone play the single player in Medal of Honor? That was honestly one of the most memorable campaigns I've played in a military shooter in recent memory. It was following the release of the single The Catalyst. MTV would poll fans on their website upon The Catalyst being issued as the record's first single, and publish several stories asking whether the song was too big of a departure for the band. A sizable chunk of those who answered the poll felt the song was too big of a change from the band's trademark sound. Looking back at the album, Mike Shinoda would tell Anthony Fantano in an interview, when asked about the band's most polarizing record, saying, "1,000 Suns, which was our fourth record. It wasn't as commercially successful as the earlier ones because nothing could be. That would be impossible. It was very polarizing. It got 1 or 5 stars by everybody, so we ended up with 3-star ratings all over the board, because half the people hated it with all their heart and soul." Despite the split opinions on the record, 1,000 Suns would give Linkin Park their 4th platinum record. The band would return in 2012 with Living Things, which saw them bring back elements of their sound from their earlier records, while also stripping away the political undertones of 1,000 Suns. Rick Rubin would return once again, having produced the band's last 3 albums. Chester would tell Rolling Stone about Living Things, saying, "With this new album, we've incorporated a lot of guitar work with big choruses and the heavier electronic stuff to give it that really big wall of sound without getting too metal. This will be more familiar to people than 1,000 Suns was, where we were like, we're just going to go bonkers." Chester would also say that the new album's lyrics would be more personal and avoid being too political, adding, "We've been writing a lot about relationships." The band's influences were also wide-ranging on the record, including Bob Dylan, all the way to punk rock groups like Pennywise. Once again, the band teamed up with EA to have their song Lies, Greed, Misery featured in the Medal of Honor Warfighter video game. Living Things would give Linkin Park their 4th #1 album, narrowly edging out soccer mom band Maroon 5 by 1,000 copies. Linkin Park would work at a frantic pace for the rest of the decade, coming out with 2014's The Hunting Party, which proved to be the band's lowest peaking album, premiering at number 3 on the Billboard album charts. It was surprising given that the band seemed to be going back to a heavier direction. It was in between the release of Living Things and The Hunting Party that Chester Bennington would get his dream gig fronting Stone Temple Pilots. It was during Chester's time as a teenager living in Arizona that a local radio station named KUKQ hosted a festival that Stone Temple Pilots headlined, with a former bandmate of Chester's from Grey Days recalling to Kerrang! When Stone Temple Pilots came on, that was a game-changing moment for all of us there. Chester was at that show, everybody was at that show, and I think that was a big imprint on every one of us. We thought these guys are so different and so amazing. Watching Scott Weiland on stage was amazing in itself, so I think that was a huge influence on all of us. Mike would tell Howard Stern that he was a little concerned when Chester started fronting STP, feeling that sometimes Chester would commit to more than he could handle, and it would take too much time away from Linkin Park, admitting that sometimes Chester was too busy with the guys from STP to work on Linkin Park material. However, Mike would admit things for the most part went pretty smoothly. But in 2015, Bennington announced he was leaving STP to focus more on Linkin Park. 2016, for its part, proved to be a rough year for Chester, as friends would tell Rolling Stone he suffered a relapse in August after going on a 3-day bender. Then as recently as October of 2016, he was still drinking. He would once again enter rehab, and Linkin Park would issue their final album, One More Light, the following year in May of 2017. Considered a betrayal by some fans and skewered by critics, One More Light saw the band enlist outside songwriters and collaborators and go in a much more pop and polished direction, ditching anything that was really reminiscent of their heavy sound. Critics and fans accused Linkin Park of going as far as selling out, and those close to Chester claimed the criticism deeply upset the frontman, who lashed out against critics in various press interviews. Despite the negative reaction to the album, One More Light still topped the album charts, and the title track as well as Heavy both did well on the singles charts. The same month as the album came out, Chester's close friend, Soundgarden frontman Chris Cornell, would be found dead in his hotel room in Detroit, Michigan, following the band's show the previous night. Chester would sing Hallelujah at his funeral and paid homage to his friend on Twitter, writing, "Your voice was joy and pain, anger and forgiveness, love and heartache all wrapped into one. I suppose that's what we all are. You helped me understand that," he'd write. Chester, who was now 41 by 2017, would tell his social media followers following Cornell's death that he was feeling creative and had written about half a dozen new songs. Rolling Stone would report that he told one of his friends around this time, and I quote, "We have to stick together and we have so much to live for." Chester was planning in September of 2017 to reunite with his pre-Linkin Park band Grey Days for a short tour. He'd also texted his friend, former Guns N' Roses drummer Matt Sorum, that he wanted to play in his all-star covers band Kings of Chaos at some point in the future. Linkin Park would play a number of dates in Europe in both June and July that summer, with the band's director of touring telling Rolling Stone, "We saw the most alive and present Chester of my 15-and-a-half-year history with the band. He was arguably in the best physical condition of his life." But there were warning signs to those close to him. Chester would tell his Dead by Sunrise bandmate Ryan Shuck that he was nearly half a year sober by June of 2017. Shuck, who also suffered from substance abuse issues, would tell Rolling Stone he was describing an hour-by-hour battle with addiction. "When I look at it now, it's horrifying. He was telling me down to the detail what he would do in the first hour he wanted to drink." Linkin Park were scheduled to kick off a nearly 40-date US tour starting in late July, but ahead of the trek, Chester had been on vacation in Arizona with his wife Talinda and his family. He would come home early from the vacation on July 19th, with Linkin Park scheduled to do a photo shoot the next morning. He wouldn't make it to that photo shoot as Chester would take his own life and was found by his housemaid. Alcohol would be found in the frontman's system, but no drugs. Chester's second wife, Talinda, would tell Anderson Cooper following his death that her husband's depression, isolation, and hopelessness was just a regular part of their daily life, telling the anchor, "Sometimes some signs were there more than others. Sometimes they weren't there at all. We were on a family vacation, and he decided to go back home to do a television commercial. This was not a time where we or any of our family suspected this to happen, which is terrifying. We thought everything was okay." Talinda would admit Chester had several times throughout their relationship where he tried to end his life. Chester's death would happen on what would have been Chris Cornell's 53rd birthday, and while some have pointed to Cornell's death as the last straw for the frontman, others have brushed it off as a coincidence. His bandmate Shuck would tell Rolling Stone, "It could be part of it, but it's a small part of it. I think that it's just another horrible event that gets put in your subconscious. It's kindling, but the fire was already burning," adding, "We don't know how much he drank, but it doesn't take much when you're that advanced an alcoholic, and you're battling to the extent he described to me. You don't need much to lose your mind for a minute." Mike, meanwhile, would tell Rolling Stone the final time he saw Chester was a few days before his death, recalling, "He wanted me to meet this kid, Watsky, who was a rapper and a poet that Chester was a fan of," adding, "He loved Watsky, and he had mentioned him enough times that I was like, well, let's meet him." We went over to the studio that we had been working at, and Watsky came down and said hi, and we met him and one of his friends, and then they took off, and Chester and I just kind of hung out there for a couple hours, just doodling around on some music and talking about the shows coming up with Blink-182. It was nothing remarkable, really. Mike would admit to Howard Stern that Chester was always cagey about what drugs he was using and rarely talked about specifics to his bandmates. Mike would claim that by the band's third album and after that, Chester was doing pretty good staying sober, and he really put in an effort to go to therapy and seek help. It was following Chester's death that the band would issue an open letter and tribute to their friends saying, "We're trying to remind ourselves that the demons who took you away from us were always part of the deal. After all, it was the way you sang about those demons that made everyone fall in love with you in the first place." We've all heard about the 5 stages of grief, which include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Mike would tell Rolling Stone what surprised him the most about losing Chester, saying, "I always thought it would happen in some kind of order and you could analyze it, but they don't happen in order. And if your family or your friends are feeling the same thing and they're all experiencing those different emotions at random in real time, that's where the chaos happens. It was in late 2017 that Linkin Park would host a tribute show to Chester with a number of special guests in Los Angeles. The band most recently is reissuing Meteora to commemorate the album's 20th anniversary. Mike would tell Howard Stern that the band's reissue of Hybrid Theory was so successful that the label and those close to the band pushed them to do something similar for Meteora. Shinoda would admit that he was a little apprehensive or on the fence about the idea, not wanting to make a habit out of doing 20th anniversary projects for each album. So initially the band agreed to look at the material they had from those sessions. According to Mike, who told Howard Stern, the track Lost, which was recently released as a single, didn't make the record because the song Numb was already on the album, and both tracks had a very similar energy and feel to them. By the time the group got to the next album, they were looking to reinvent their sound, so Lost was not considered for the next record and was instead shelved. In 2018, Mike would admit to an interviewer when asked about the future of the band, "I know the other guys, they love to be on stage, they'd love to be in the studio, and so to not do that would be like, I don't know, almost like unhealthy," adding, "It's not my goal to look for a new singer. If it does happen, it has to happen naturally." As recently as last year, Mike would give an update on the status of Linkin Park, saying that there's no future tours planned or new albums coming from the group. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories.